Well, friends, Fiona has asked me to limit my remarks tonight to 2 hours only, so I'm going to cut my normal speech short. But we've had some wonderful speakers tonight, and I will really speak fairly briefly about some of the really big issues facing our country. This forum comes at a good time for a number of reasons. Firstly, we are being reminded, if we needed any reminder, that the climate emergency is no longer a forecast or a projection or a prediction. It is a lived reality for every single Australian today. It is being lived by the people of Brisbane and people of Lismore. It is being lived by the people of Sydney. It is being lived by the people of the South Coast, as it was so devastatingly 2 years ago. It is a lived reality. The climate emergency is here. It is also an important time because in a couple of weeks, on May the 7th or 14th or 21st, the nation faces a fork in the road. A choice. And one of the key choices is, do we deal with this climate emergency or do we not? For 9 years we have not. And it's beyond time that we do. We must. Now, there are many reasons to act on the climate emergency. We've heard some of them very eloquently tonight. Michelle on the health impacts of the climate emergency. More Australians will die younger because of climate change. Natural disasters, heat waves, which are a big issue where I live in western suburbs of Sydney. We are adding 1 day a year over 35 degrees every 5 years. That impacts on our elderly Australians in a particularly pernicious way. Natural disasters, vector-borne diseases, mosquito-borne diseases will become more and more common as our climate warms. So the health case is strong. The case of moral obligation to our future generations is strong. To the rest of the world is strong. Some people say, well, Australia only has 1% of emissions. Why do we bother? That is such a completely fallacious argument. We are the world's biggest or second biggest emitter per capita population, depending on how you calculate it. We are also the world's 14th biggest emitter in absolute terms, which means we are really arguing, if we don't care, well, those 13 countries that emit more than us should do something about it. But us and the other 270 countries that are responsible for more than a third of the world's emissions shouldn't have to bother. Yes, we are only 1% of the world's emissions. We were 1% of the Allied troops from World War II too, and we don't disregard that impact that we had. So these are the impacts of the climate emergency which make it so necessary to act. Again, as I said, that we lived here on the South Coast 2 years ago in such a devastating way. 21% of our forested land in Australia was destroyed by bushfire. That is a world record. It had never happened before, and it happens for a reason, because the climate is changing. But I mainly want to talk tonight about another reason. Because, frankly, we have won, those of us who care about climate and believe there's a climate emergency, we've won the health argument over and over. We've won the moral obligation argument over and over. We've won the international obligation argument over and over. What we have consistently lost is the economic argument, the jobs argument for action on climate change. And if we can win that argument, we can win the next election. And so on December 3rd, Albo and I released our climate change policy, Powering Australia. Because I've only got 2 hours, I'm not going to run you through every element of it. But I'm going to run you through some of the key impacts. I can talk about the emissions reduction. Bunji, you were right. 2050 is too late. It's what happens in the next 10 years that counts. So we've committed to a 43% emission reduction between now and 2030. It's hard starting in 2022. I'll be honest with you. It would have been easier if we'd started in 2016 or 2019. 2022 is very late to be starting on a 2030 emissions reduction target. It's like walking out the middle of the Sydney cricket ground in the 15th over in a 50 overs match and starting from the 15th over. That's what we're doing as a country. But we have to, the best time to start was 20 years ago, the second best time is election day, and that's what we propose to do. But as well as that policy, which includes the 43% emissions reduction target and all the policies to achieve it, all modelled, it's not just a number we picked out of the air. Every single policy in that document has been modelled independently, not by me, and it adds up to 43%. Our $20 billion worth of investment to upgrade the energy grid. Doesn't sound very sexy, does it? More poles and wires. It is absolutely essential. There is no transition without transmission. We need to get the energy from where it's produced, renewable energy, to where it'll be consumed. At the moment, our grid will not cope. If we all bought electric vehicles tomorrow, and I'd love it if we all did, they're wonderful things, but if we all did and went home and charged them at 5 o'clock, our energy grid would collapse overnight. It's not built for it, let alone getting the renewable energy from where it is produced to where it's consumed. So our policy to upgrade the grid, to invest $20 billion is vital. Our safeguards policy to actually reduce emissions in our 215 biggest emitters by law, to require those reductions, is important. Our community batteries policy is important. We announced one today for Maloney's Beach. Our solar banks policy to enable people who can't afford or access solar panels to get access to solar energy and the renewable energy revolution is important. But I'll tell you what else is important, is the impact on the economy of doing this. Because the world's climate emergency is Australia's jobs opportunity. For too long, we have been sold the story, frankly by our political opponents, that action on climate change comes at the expense of jobs, and the expense of jobs in regional Australia in particular. And there has been a terrible attempt, and a successful attempt, at identity politics, dividing Australians amongst each other. Saying, you know, inner city elites care about climate change, and it's people in regional Australia who pay the price with their jobs. It's always been a lie, an effective lie politically. But it's always been a lie. It's never more been a lie than today. Because this is an enormous opportunity for Australia. We have in Australia some natural advantages, some opportunities. More sunlight hits our landmass than any other country in the world, bar none. This is an enormous economic opportunity for Australia. We can harness that energy for ourselves, turn ourselves into a 100% renewable economy, and then turn ourselves into a 200 and 300 and 400% renewable economy and export that power to countries around us. Think of Singapore, a country that wants to reach net zero, but finds it very hard. They don't have the land that's required for big solar and wind installations. So we can sell them our renewable energy. We can convert it into green hydrogen and put it on ships and take it to Singapore. We can sell it for a submarine cable, which is actually being proposed now, from a solar farm in the Northern Territory with 24 million solar panels to be connected to Singapore via submarine cable. These are the opportunities for Australia if we have a government willing to seize them. And so, as well as that policy we announced on December 3, we released the most comprehensive economic modelling ever commissioned by an opposition about any policy ever. Some people say, what's the cost of your policy? Well, I'll tell you what the impact of our policy is. It'll create 604,000 jobs across Australia. 5 out of 6 of those will be in regional Australia. Don't have anybody tell you climate change is an inner city obsession and people in regional Australia pay the price of action on climate change. No. People in regional Australia pay the price of climate change with floods and bushfires and other impacts. But people in regional Australia are actually the ones who will benefit from action on climate change economically. It stands to reason. Why are 5 out of 6 jobs created under our policy in regional Australia? Because the areas that have powered Australia for so long are the same areas that will power us into the future, just in a different way. Apart from solar panels on our roofs, we don't have the room in the city to create renewable energy. It takes space for a big solar array. We don't have the access to the energy grid to connect the renewable energy. And the skills are in regional Australia to make energy. In the Hunter Valley, in central Queensland, in the Latrobe Valley, in Collibunbury, in all those areas that have traditionally powered Australia are the same areas that power us into the future. So this is at the heart of our Powering Australia plan. Ambitious, but realistic. Every single policy modelled in terms of impact on emissions and jobs. Every single one. And one which is focused on finally winning the argument that action on climate change is good for us economically. Good for our health, good for our well-being as a nation, very important for us in our national security. If the government wants a national security debate, okay. Climate change will create millions of climate refugees in our area. Think of the low-lying areas of Indonesia that will be deluged as our sea levels rise, and the impact of that on national security. We're going to have all those debates. But as Australians go to the polls on May 14, or 7 or 21, many of them will be hearing the scare campaign that this climate action comes at the expense of your job. As I said, it's always been a lie. It's never more been a lie than today, and we can and will disprove it. And I believe we can win the election. We can win the election with an ambitious climate change policy, one that delivers for all Australians who have a stake. No more division. I've even heard the Prime Minister say, the wine bars of the inner city and the goat's cheese circle, he calls it. Apparently we don't eat feta cheese in regional Australia, according to the Prime Minister. But he actually divides Australians in that way, and it's disgusting and must stop. We can have a federal government which unites Australians, all of us, in this important national and international endeavour to finally tackle the climate change emergency. We can do it. Of course, we will only do it if the wonderful member for Gilmore is returned and serving as an important member of that Labor government, and then we can go on and do good things for Australia.